Welcome to Mind Meets Body and Soul, a podcast that connects the dots between clinical mental health and spiritual holistic wellness. I'm Heather, a licensed clinical social worker and mental health guru.
And I'm Devon, a Reiki master, spiritual teacher, and lover of all things woo-woo. We're here to discuss various wellness topics, highlighting the connection between the mind, body, and soul.
We'll be offering nuggets of wisdom from each of our fields with the ultimate goal of bridging the gap between our two worlds. Whether you lean more into cognitive psychology
or flow with the woo-woo waters, our intention is to help you prioritize yourself and unlock a fresh perspective to healing, growth, and expansion. We're so excited you're here. Let's jump in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mind Meets Body and Soul. Here with my lovely co-host, Heather. How's it going?
It's going well, Devon. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. This is the first time that I'm seeing your face, and I don't know, it's been maybe 2 weeks, so we definitely more than our usual. So always love when we come from these little breaks and we get to see each other.
I know. This is like the literal only time that we actually see each other. I mean, I feel like we text all the time, but it's so nice to just see you and hear your voice and get the time to just sit and chat.
Agreed. So last time we recorded together, it was right before you were going away on vacation. How was vacation?
It was really nice. Nick and I went away. We went down to Austin, Texas for a long weekend, and it was just nice to explore a new city and see all the fun things and eat all the good food. It's very trendy and really cute down there. So we had a really good time.
It is a really cool city. I'm glad to hear that. Probably just a great time to unplug and unwind, and I love that.
Yeah, it was really nice. I feel refreshed coming back from it. So, any updates? What's new with you?
Not a whole lot, except for some really big news, exciting news. Earlier today, before we started recording this podcast, I went with my mom to her 1-year checkup post chemo treatment. So I've mentioned this before in previous episodes, she was on a cancer journey a year ago, and her last chemo treatment was October 31st, 2022. So today she had her 1-year checkup, and she has been in remission for an entire year. So we're very excited, very happy, a lot of relief, definitely a lot to celebrate.
Oh my gosh, hugs to her. That's so exciting. I am so happy for her and you and everyone in your circle. That's amazing.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, so, not a whole lot going on necessarily, but that's a big thing for sure. And before we get into the episode too, I do want to shout out the podcast and another milestone that we, Mind Meets Body and Soul, have hit together. According to Spotify for Podcasters, we now officially have over 1,000 listens to our podcast. So celebrating that milestone.
Yes, very exciting. And if you do the math actually and you divide the 1,000 listens by the number of episodes, it came out to 33.33 listens per episode, which is just a very synchronistic number, and love that for us. So that was really fun. Very exciting.
And that's the number that you often see and resonate with, right?
Yeah, that's definitely, threes are a good number for me.
Amazing. Well, no surprise there then. And we just really want to thank all of our listeners, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, wherever you are. And also that number doesn't include our YouTube listeners and followers. So really exciting. We love sharing these conversations and these episodes with you each and every week, and are really just appreciative to have the feedback that we do.
Yep. So what are we getting into today, Devon? You want to introduce this episode's topic?
Yeah, I thought that given that we are now fully transitioning from one season, summer, into another season, fall. I mean, if you look outside, the trees, the leaves on the trees are all different colors, and there are some trees that are already pretty bare. It's gotten pretty cold here in the past few weeks. And then on top of that, too, just navigating some similar changes in life professionally and personally, I thought that it would be a great time to share a conversation on acknowledging and recognizing and embracing change.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very appropriate given the time of year that we're in. I mean, I feel like autumn is all about change, and, we can look to nature certainly to guide us through that. I think it'll be a great topic because I know how hard change is for so many people, and I'm excited to unpack it a little bit more and then, give some tips like we love to do.
For sure. And there's so much to this topic of change that I know like we can speak to on the mind and the body and the soul or spiritual level of that. So it's a topic that you and I can both speak extensively to and connect or bridge the gap between the two. The reason why I was drawn to the topic of change is I had gotten inspiration from an Instagram post. Where else do we get our inspiration from? But I'll read the blurb just so that I don't misspeak. It was an excerpt from the author Young Pueblo, his work, and it says, "Unpopular truth. What's meant for you will sometimes feel scary, risky, and new. Ease and calm don't always mean you're moving in the right direction. The biggest rewards usually come from having the guts and perseverance to create your own path." And that
Mm,
was an excerpt that I had seen actually a couple months ago before I was getting ready to head out to Boulder for that month and a half. But I've thought about it since. And I know that in this context, maybe he's talking about like making some huge change in your life. But I think it really does relate to this overall theme or topic of change because oftentimes, and I think I'll ask you to kind of start us off with the psychological component to it, but oftentimes we find ourselves very resistant to change. And I think that that's probably natural human tendency within us. So, if you wouldn't mind speaking to that first from your perspective, how we, mentally view or approach or resist change.
Change makes me laugh because I don't feel like I know that we're always changing biologically. Like physically, our body is always going through changes, and we're always growing and evolving and getting older. And, there's always change happening. It's like the only certain thing in our lives. And yet, our ego or the human side of us wants to resist it and avoid it at all costs, which is the part that makes me laugh because it's inevitable. So, we talked a few episodes ago about neuroplasticity and that like our brain has the ability to change over time too. I think the thing that makes us want to resist change is because we don't know what is going to happen. It's uncomfortable in that like it feels out of our control, it feels unknown, it feels unfamiliar. And as humans, we like safety, we like security, and we assume that with safety and security is sameness. And instead, that's why I think change feels so scary because it's unpredictable.
I wonder if too the our like mental resistance towards change or like our dislike for change is because so much of our lives have been made certain with the advancements of technology, the presence of social media and all of that. Like we can make so many things certain in our lives these days that like the bigger things that we don't have that control over or that are just naturally changing without our control, if it like amps up the reaction that we have to them or the negative reaction that we have to them.
I'm sure it does. I mean, my initial thought to that is that like we don't then build the tolerance to handle it. Like everything being so predictable makes our like emotional strength to handle something different, scary, unknown. We're like less exposed to that. We have less experience in it. Therefore, it's like something we want less, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, possibly. And something else too, the mention that we are like hardwired for safety, security, predictability. I mean, I think that part has just always been like an innate part of human beings. I know that we've talked a lot about the nervous system regulation piece and how our nervous system in any given moment is just trying to make sure that we are in a place of like homeostasis, safety, anything veering away from that or anything that's activating that then throws us into that like fight or flight. And so coming back to that excerpt from Young Pueblo's book, it's like oftentimes what is new, different, feels scary because our nervous system is like, hey, this is not what we have known. And so I'm sensing a little bit of like a threat to the system. And so our nervous system kind of treats that new thing like a threat.
Yeah, I mean, think about when maybe you've ever been in a new place, or I use the analogy a lot of times of like when you're driving and you're lost and you don't know where you are. Like we have this tendency to like get closer to the steering wheel and turn the radio down and like focus on our maps, because everybody uses maps to get everywhere now. Like we're so much more aware and alert and like tensed up because we're like, oh, our nervous system is doing exactly what you said. It's like prepping us because we're not feeling as secure. We're not feeling as comfortable. So, this change aspect, even though it might be really great for us, we do tread with caution because we're not sure. So, our nervous system is like, all right, I'm here and I'm ready to protect you. Whenever you need it, like, we'll go. But the reality is, we don't actually need to be feeling threatened. We should be aware and we should be focused, but we have this like fear kind of associated with it too.
Hmm. This is a really great example of where I think I mean, in so many different ways, but where I specifically think that the mind is super powerful here and where we really have to use our mind to kind of take back control of our body responses because it's that nervous system piece where it's throwing our body off. Like our body's in this state of like, help me, things are not right. And yet, really, like reality, it's all okay. We're not necessarily unsafe as we were approaching something new. And so then it's like the power of our mind to kind of take back control of our body. As opposed to in other ways, I talk a lot about how our body holds such innate wisdom and that when we tune into our body, when we work with it and this and that, like there's so much power and so many great things that we can take away from that. Like in this situation, when we're embracing change, I feel like it's very much like a mental process of then getting your body back into a state of regulation. Would you say so?
Yeah, I think it's very much reframing that different. I say all the time, different does not equal bad. Like it's reframing that just because this is new and unfamiliar doesn't mean that we're in any sort of danger. And I very much think it's us talking to ourselves and using those emotional regulation skills to comfort and soothe when we're feeling some type of way about being in a different environment. But I think our mind is really powerful here in doing that reframing or that cognitive flexibility work where we know, okay, this is different, and different does not mean it's bad. This is unfamiliar, but unfamiliar isn't dangerous. And if we can start to tease out the differences there, I think it makes a world of difference.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's a good point.
That's like the mental mind piece of this. In your world, Devon, what are the energetics of change?
Well, I always describe this when I'm working with clients and we're working really intently on changing an aspect of their life or changing a mindset. And because we love visuals here, I always imagine it as though we are like everybody is swimming in one direction, like downstream. And change is deciding to turn around or to make a different turn and to swim in that different direction. And so I use this example oftentimes when people are trying to implement change, consciously implement change in their lives, and they're feeling a lot of resistance. Maybe that's from their own storylines or from like the actual people or situations in their lives, and they're just kind of like hitting some of that resistance. And I use that visual because it makes sense. Like energy has no bounds. It can flow in all different directions, but if we're used to directing energy in one specific way, and especially if we're surrounded by a bunch of other people or a community where also like that energy is flowing very much in one direction or like one stream, then when we consciously try to implement that and bring it into a different direction, there is always going to be a little bit of resistance and a little bit of um it won't always happen at the, like, pace that we think it's going to. So on the energetic level, I can understand how that change piece feels so uncomfortable because our natural tendency is going to be, like, realigning with the direction of the energy flow that it's been heading in.
I think that's really interesting, and it makes a lot of sense because we are kind of just like creatures of habit in some sense. And I think we like the comfort of knowing and predictability. And if we've been flowing or our energy has been channeling in one direction, plus other people following that same path, it's going to feel uncomfortable or just unfamiliar for us to turn around and channel it in a different way. I mean, that's the definition of friction, right? It's like rubbing against, it's like going in a different direction. And it's kind of like rubbing against it, creating that uncomfortable feeling. And we'll get to, talking about like why we should embrace change, but it's also like uncomfortable to step out of your comfort zone, and to do something different requires courage and vulnerability and strength. And it can feel scary in doing that.
Yeah. It reminds me of the conversation that we had on reframing what's meant to be will be, and how we talked about like our qualms about that, like what's meant to be will be belief, and just how not everything that's meant to be will feel instantaneously calm and sure and without any kind of resistance. And I think it's because we are hardwired for predictability and security and stability, and going against that or choosing a different path feels really uncomfortable. And so what's meant to be won't always feel easy and seamless at first per se. There might be that hump or few that you have to get over or overcome first before this new path that you're taking or for this new direction that you're swimming in feels more natural. It actually reminds me a lot too of the Q&A episode we had where you were talking about mindfulness and how mindfulness is like choosing a different path than the one that's already carved out or the one that's already set out for you.
Yeah, I mean, we have literal growing pains as children, right? Like any sort of growth is going to bring uncertainty. And I think so much of this is learning that we have the choice to change. We don't have to continue doing things the way that they are. Or when we're forced to embrace change, again, either way, the therapist of the conversation, of course, is going to say this, but it's so much about your mindset towards that change and towards swimming upstream or channeling your energy or leaning into the discomfort. Like it's going to be uncomfortable no matter what, but we don't have to suffer. We don't have to torture ourselves by trying to grab onto that steering wheel and force something different. We can embrace and surrender. I mean, so many of our former episodes are all kind of funneling into this conversation on change, surrender, radical acceptance, all of the things.
Yeah, for sure. And what's interesting too is we've just touched on the psychological components of change and the like body, nervous system parts, the energetics. And when I'm thinking about like the next direction that we're taking this on that like spiritual level is like every single part of our life, and you said this too, like every single part of our life indicates change. Like it's really the only thing that is certain in our lives. And that's a really big like spiritual realization because we are constantly changing and evolving. And like we started off this conversation talking about the change in season, right? Like we can look to the trees outside of us, we can look to the different phases of the moon that are constantly changing and evolving. And yet we're the ones as humans that are like trying to hold on for dear life, holding on to the certainty and to the constant that we seek in life.
What's interesting is that, like, I feel like I brought in at the beginning talking about how we're physically always changing. Our brain is changing, our body is always changing and growing and getting older. And now you're kind of speaking to the spiritual component of change and how we're always evolving spiritually and changing. And I just think that it's interesting that physically and spiritually that kind of mirrors each other.
Yeah. I think it's helpful to put it into that perspective when we as we are doing in this episode, like laying it all out and realizing that change really is that constant in our lives. And so that kind of brings me to that next piece of all right, well, we've now recognized that change is a constant and that change is a part of our growth and evolution as humans or as a society, et cetera. How do we work to then embrace change in our lives? And I would love to hear like the work that you do with clients or even in your own personal life. What does that look like for you?
I think the first thing, which we're kind of doing here, is to acknowledge it and experience it. You said earlier, I don't think we have a ton of opportunity in this day and age to experience a ton of change. I don't know if I even really want to say that. Like, I guess I'm saying what I'm trying to say is like, keep exposing yourself to it. Notice all of the changes that you do overcome and that you do experience on a day-to-day basis, because there is always change. I mean, the whole day we're going through like follow the sun. Everything's changing throughout our days. And really, my work with clients looks like naming it and then figuring out for that person how to navigate it. For me, on a personal level, it's a lot of acceptance work. I know, like, okay, I have to let go of the wheel and I am going to choose to surrender slash embrace these changes, because even though they're hard, I know that I'm growing and I know that I'm evolving as a result of this, and looking for more than just the negative part of change. Like, yes, change can be scary. So, this is where my yes and tool comes in. Yes, change can be scary, and I grow, I evolve, I learn, I find opportunity. And acknowledging that, like, while it might not be my favorite thing, there is also all of this other good stuff that comes right on the edge of that.
Yeah, I love that suggestion. It really just speaks to everything, all these conversations that we're having episode after episode of just bringing in that mindful awareness. And like the more conscious that we become of all of this, the less unconscious we become to all of it. And so we really start just like taking back that mental control of our lives and of what we're experiencing. And I feel like that's such a purpose of why people go to therapy is to become more aware of their thoughts, of their feelings, and then learn the mental tools to really master those.
I've been doing a lot too, and this is probably because of this podcast and because of your world opening me up more to this stuff. But I also do a lot of the emotional regulation when we're feeling that, like when we're feeling triggered or when we're feeling those um like fearful inner child moments. But I'm sure you'll speak to that. So from your world then, Devon, whether it's personally, professionally with clients, how do you support or what do you teach when it comes to change?
I love looking at, and I think it's thanks really to this conversation that we've been having and that I'm thinking about it more, but looking at something like change in a holistic way is recognizing the very mental piece plus the physiological body response plus the spiritual fact that everything is always changing and evolving. And I think like being able to break it down into those three elements that we have, I'm realizing that like you and I both, I'm sure, are approaching it from this very holistic view. Like just because you are the therapist in the conversation and your work is more mental based, I really think that this is a topic that both you and I are approaching in a very holistic way. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I think of the I mean, generally since this podcast, I think of the mind, body, soul as like three overlapping circles. But I think in this topic specifically, this might be one of the more overlapping of the conversations that we've had.
Agreed. Because I think, like, if we're thinking about how we're feeling when we approach some kind of change or when we're trying to implement some kind of change. The physiological, the body response is probably the most obvious one, right? It's maybe like the heartbeat or the pit in the stomach type feeling that then mentally we think, okay, I'm feeling a little anxious or I'm feeling scared or I'm feeling excited. And then using our mind to kind of like talk ourselves down at the same time, maybe turning to some of those energy healing techniques to move those emotions out of our body or to regulate our nervous system. In the past, I've talked about like EFT tapping, or we've talked about like breath work or working out, any of those. Like crying is an energetic release as well. And I think it's then once we recognize with our minds what's going on in our bodies and we're taking that action to regulate our nervous system to come back to a place of safety and security within, then we can also turn to the spiritual concepts and practices of like relating to this constant of change and like the purpose for change in our lives.
As you're talking about that, I was laughing because I almost feel like, okay, I'm just going to walk you through my thought process. Our body, our nervous system is like aware, hyper aware of change. And anytime something's like different or unfamiliar, I think our nervous system starts to like gear up and get ready. The ironic thing though is that like our body is the thing that's always changing, and our nervous system is the thing that doesn't like change. And I'm actually one of the first people to help my clients understand that your brain is lying to you a lot of times. And like, I don't love how cognitive I think we are all the time. And like in this conversation, I think we're both ironically saying, like, be more thoughtful, be more like rational and logical and less in your body. Like it's almost like the brain in this conversation has to be coaching the nervous system, whereas normally I think our nervous system is pretty aware and smart, and our bodies are these like intelligent beings. And I feel like we're having a different conversation this time. It's like opposite of what we're normally preaching.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really that's a really good point. So, yeah, this conversation's like really like shout out to the mind. And we talk about how like the body doesn't lie, but honestly, yeah, some the body doesn't lie. It'll always tell us how it's feeling and whether something is feeling safe or not, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily always valid.
Yeah, like it just might not be the reality. Like it feels like something dangerous is happening, but we know logically, and the reality is that like we're not actually in danger. It's just something's changing, something's
Mhm.
different.
Yes, exactly. So if we can listen to that, what our body is telling us, and they acknowledge, like, okay, yes, I see or I feel that fear. And I know that it's coming from a well intentioned place, right? Like trying to get me back to safety. Now, me as the mindful, conscious being that I am, I can use my mind. And sometimes I'll even like talk to my nervous system or I'll talk to those different voices in my head and just work my way down from that. I mean, last episode, I opened up about my recent dating experiences or coming back into the dating world. Like that did not feel comfortable for my nervous system. Of course. And once I realized how uncomfortable I was feeling and how kind of anxious I was feeling, I was then able to be like, look, nervous system, I get it. This is not a comfortable place to be in. We've been very comfortable for the past 2 years, me just very tuned into you and soothing you. And now I'm bringing somebody else into the picture, literally. And that is throwing us out of whack. But I'm not going to change what I'm doing just to make you just to bring you back to that level of comfort because we need to grow. I'm making this decision and this is the next step in my journey for us, and I will listen to you and I will regulate you as much as I can, but we're going to get used to this change. And it sounds so silly to be like having that conversation with ourselves, but I kid you not, it made me feel a lot better at the time. And I think that's what we preach in all of these conversations is really bringing all parts of us, mind, body, and soul into coherence. Because I know that my soul also doesn't want me to stay single for the rest of my life and that I have a lot to learn in my future relationships. Like anything, my clients, they have a lot that they can learn through the next step of their journey, whether that's starting a new job, moving to a new city, or just changing like a habit in their lives. Like our souls want us to evolve. That's why we are here. If you resonate with the spiritual journey, then you know, or then you have some kind of understanding that we are here to learn, to grow, to change, and to evolve. And so the most helpful work in embracing that change is bringing all parts of ourselves into coherence.
No part of me thinks you talking to yourself is silly. I think that's like a critical piece of this. That's reparenting. That is part of the emotional regulation. That is coaching yourself through this. So I think that's how we level up. I mean, all throughout our childhood we have teachers and parents and caregivers like supporting us and giving us these messages, and then we get to a certain point where we're like an adult and we're expected to figure it out on your own. The reality is like you can still do that for yourself. Show up for yourself, love on yourself, celebrate yourself, coach yourself, and talk yourself through some hard things, because that is how we get to the other side of it.
That's such a good point, and I think that's, one a really powerful part about having a therapist, teacher, mentor, coach, healer, etc., is that yes, when we become adults, we kind of lose that. Like as we get older, we kind of lose that support of somebody that's coaching us through or teaching us these things. And so I love the idea of like us as adults having that support system, chosen support system in our therapists, coaches, healers, mentors, etc. And as we've talked about before, the best therapists, coaches, teachers, healers are the ones that help bring you back to yourself and help you become your own best healer. And so I know, but I hope, especially in this conversation, that that's what we're doing is that not only are we offering this support to our clients, but we're also showing them and encouraging them, showing our audience, encouraging our audience to do that for themselves.
I say all the time that like my goal as a therapist is for my clients to essentially fire me because they no longer need me. I have taught them all of the things, and then they go out, like you're saying, and talk to themselves and coach themselves through and use all of these tools. I love that we have this platform too to be able to share these conversations and make them accessible so that people can, whether they're clients of ours, they can listen and get these reminders, whether they're people just like on their own journey, have access to the understanding of how to navigate things like change, things like social comparison, things like love languages and relationships. I think it's really awesome
Me
to
too.
on our own little horn, like pat
Yeah.
ourselves on the back.
Agreed. So, as we are wrapping up this episode, do you have any lasting tips for embracing change or anything else that you wanted to add in there?
I feel like I'm going to kind of sound like you here, but I think it's hearing that voice or that nervous system when it's, or that inner child, whatever it is that you want to call it, like hearing where it's coming from, hearing its fear, and then choosing to step into our mind and talk back to it and coach yourself and talk yourself through it. Of course, the nervous system regulation piece of breath work and body work, but also it is reframing and choosing to look at change in a different way and thinking about change in a different way and using your logical, rational thought to coach your fear and your emotions through that.
Yeah, I love the word reframing that you use because the more that we can mentally reframe things, we turn them from being these like scary, untouchable parts of ourselves and turning them into opportunities for learning and for growth. And so, yeah, sound advice. And I feel like this, I mean, we're oftentimes in sync with our conversations and our advice, but I feel like this one, we were just like so intertwined and in a positive way, like very much on the same page. So I'm excited that this specific conversation was really full, like mind, body, soul connection.
Yeah, it was really cool to see us both talk from a different perspective, but like on the same page about it. And I very much, I don't know if it's a result of us having been 31 episodes into this podcast and like that's getting us in sync with each other, or if it's just the nature of this conversation. But it is really exciting to kind of see how this all came together. Do you have any final tips, tools, words of wisdom from your world?
I'm really happy with this journey that we've taken our listeners on throughout this episode. So I feel pretty comfortable wrapping it up here.
Nice little organic ending. I love that.
Agreed. So it's been a couple weeks at least since you and I recorded an episode. So I can't really remember who finished the episode or who ended our episode with a vision board message, but I'm going to pass this one over to you this week. If you have something on your vision board that is calling out to you that you want to leave our audience with, what do you have?
It's funny because I have something on my vision board that says to keep the summer vibes going, but I like almost want to take it down now because I feel like that isn't the point, right? We don't want to keep doing the same thing or expecting the same thing over and over. And we want to be able to embrace change and a new season. And I think that is what I want to leave everyone with, is just embracing it,
I love
surrendering to
that.
it,
Yep.
allowing it.
So reframing what we have on our vision board.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Heather, for another great conversation. And before we say goodbye, I know that you are a few days into your growing mindset therapy gratitude challenge, if you wanted to speak to that.
Yeah. So, just a reminder for anybody listening that I am in the middle of hosting a 30-day gratitude challenge. I'll put the link in the show notes. You can find that on our website. It doesn't matter that the challenge theoretically started on November 1st and runs through the end of the month, but it's a asynchronous challenge, if you will, that you can start today and you can do for the next 30 days. It's just 30 prompts to start practicing gratitude. So whether you're trying to kickstart your gratitude practice or you want to level it up, it just has 30 prompts for you to practice and just kind of being more grateful in this November month.
Beautiful. Well, as always, grateful to be sharing these conversations on this platform with you. And as always, I look forward to our next conversation.
As always, same. So thank you, Devon, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye. We are so glad that you took the time to share this space with us. We'll be releasing new episodes of Mind Meets Body and Soul every Tuesday, so be sure to give us a follow and share this podcast with those you love.
To connect with us and join our communities, head to the show notes where you'll find our contact information and individual websites. Until next week, stay grounded, keep growing, and trust that everything you seek is unfolding for you.